golf, and something that we've wanted to do for quite a while, and my brothers and I have talked about it, and that's what we've done, is talked about it. And Edwin has done a lot of work on the genealogy part of it, so we thought we might like to get this all down on, on film or on a regular tape or something like that. So Greggy has proved to be the one that really is going to do it. So today we're going to talk to Edwin, my oldest brother, and he's going to give us some of the facts and some of his memories of the Hart family as he knows it. Brother Edwin.
Brother Edwin. About that oldest part, it may be oldest chronologically, but it's youngest in many other ways.
Bragging now. Did I lose things?
And that girl I was talking to you about, that Barbara, that's what she does, produces all of this stuff. You know, directs it, pulls together all the
yeah.
And
well, maybe we
Chilean folk songs and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Well,
This is what I want you to do. Tell me, first of all, tell me what day it is, so we know that all this is going to be true, so that you can tell us what day.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the day after Thanksgiving in 1985, which would be what, December.
11/30/85.
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
today's the 30th.
Yeah.
Today's the
29th.
29th.
Okay.
Yeah. Today's the 29th. 11/29/85. Well. So you're going to ask the question.
So I'm going to ask the questions.
Well, that's good, because then you'll give it. That's how you're going to become a producer in your old age.
Okay.
And so where do you want to start?
Well, let's start. Let's start with when as far as you know, is when the Harts first got established.
Yeah.
Around this area.
Well, to the best of my knowledge, and most of that's word of mouth and going way back, I had two aunts, Steve's sisters, Mary and Catherine, and they used to tell stories about all of these things, and they had the dates and they had the villages and island that they all started from, but I've lost track of all that sort of stuff, and there's nothing on record that I know of. But
now that would have been back in the middle 1800s.
It was prior to. The first guy who came over here was a guy by the name of Daniel, and I think that was probably around 1849, 1850.
Which was the family, the first.
He was the first guy.
That was the big famine in Ireland, so that's when he.
Yeah, they must have all come over at that particular point in time on account of the famine. So that what county they came from or what the circumstances were, I haven't the faintest idea, but. There was a piece of paper that I found years and years ago. It showed that he had bought some property on Commercial Street. Now Commercial Street is where, around Atlantic Avenue or something like that.
Yeah.
But I never checked it out. And the next thing, they ended up, I think, up around Mission Hill. Now I'm not sure whether they lived in Mission Hill. Probably though. And then they moved down to the corner of Freeport and Dorchester Avenue, where they had that big farm, which was all apple orchards, according to Steve at the time, in Fields. And he married. I don't know who he married, but
now this is Daniel we're talking.
This is Daniel. And he went into the contracting business, and you saw the card there. And he used to work for, it was all an old time, I would imagine, political type thing of, horses and carts and building, well, they said, well, he definitely did. He built the cellar for the South Station, for the old South Station.
The cellar, as a matter of fact, they're renovating that now.
Yeah.
And the cellar, they originally designed that for trains to come in underneath the station.
Okay.
I don't know if
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and apparently after they designed it, they realized that with all the smoke and the smog and everything, it couldn't be used, and they filled it in or they closed it off and they never used it again.
Yeah.
Until within the past year or so, when they completely gutted the whole South Station and they found that the cellar still under there with tracks,
Yeah.
which had been built to go underneath.
Well, Well, he presumably had done that and was a contractor for the city of Boston, because at that time I think the Irish were beginning to take over. They had an Irish mayor, and it was the same time that Grandpa Hurley was, roughly speaking, in the House of Reps in 1885. So in around that area was when Daniel was a contractor, and I guess they played rough in those days, just like they do now. And he probably didn't go to somebody's lunch, and pretty soon he wasn't doing any more contracting. And but in those days, evidently, they were pretty well off, because I can remember Steve talking about coming out to Randolph to see Fanny and these horse and fours and stuff like that.
Yeah.
At least that was the story.
Now,
Yeah.
was this the same Daniel Hart that was involved with the subway? The Park Street station and all that?
Oh, I don't know anything about that.
Oh, that's your brother
Yeah.
telling me those stories.
Yeah, you told me that.
I never told you about Park Street Station, because I don't know anything about
Well, maybe it was the South
it.
Station.
It was the South Station.
Oh, okay.
It was the South Station.
Dad, you said there was a plaque down there, and Beth
Well,
saw it.
that's what I heard from my oldest brother.
Oh, didn't you say Beth saw it?
I don't know whether she actually saw it or not. I don't know whether she did. I'm not sure about that.
But anyway, you were saying how you thought they were fairly well off.
Yeah, they apparently were fairly well off, and I mean, the way they dressed and stuff like that in those old pictures. And as I say, he used to come a-courting according to Fanny in this, in this rig and stuff.
Yeah. Now, when would this have been roughly?
Well, that must have been around, I would say, in the 1880s to the 1900s, roughly. Because they had a whole mess of horses in a garage down in a shed down on the corner of Freeport Street and Dorchester Avenue. Remember Steve used to tell about going out in the backyard through the mud and go swimming in the bay there?
Yeah.
And then they had that place up in the so-called summer house up in the corner of Canton Strerit and High Street, where Aries, not Aries, yes, Aries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Normally
That's
it
ripped down just a few years ago, and they got a new house up there. But that was where they used to keep the horses.
Yeah.
In the summertime.
What, the horses that?
The horses that
Steve
they
used to-
used for, to pull the wagons in the contracting business.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, this is all hearsay. I don't ever recall anybody telling it to me directly. It's just you picked it up, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because Steve never was much to tell.
Now, did you know your grandfather, or
No.
no? He was gone by the time.
He died around 1900. Well, to put it in some kind of a sequence, evidently, if Daniel, when you take a look at this stone, I think that the birth date on there is something like 1813, 1814. And then he came to this country around 49 or whatever, which would have meant that he married relatively late in life. And he had Daniel, and he had Stephen J. No, excuse me, he had Stephen J. and Patrick. And there must have been some girls. There's some names on the stone, but I don't know who they are. I really have no idea who they are. So
Now, those would be your aunts and uncles.
these would be. Now, what did we call them? Would be Steve's father. Steve's father would be Patrick,
Oh, okay.
and his great uncle would have been that Stephen J. Who, so Daniel's two kids, at least two kids, would have been Stephen J. and Patrick.
Okay. And Patrick was your grandfather.
And Patrick would have been my grandfather, and I never met him because he died in around 1900. That's on the stone down there in the cemetery.
In Randolph.
Yeah. In Randolph? He was buried in Randolph?
Yeah, he's buried in Randolph. And
Now, how about your grandmother? Was she around at all?
my grandmother is in that book.
Okay.
Grandmother is in that book, which, by the way, I think was a second marriage.
Oh, no,
Well, I understood it to be. I don't really know. And what her maiden name was, I don't know. I'd love to find out. I think Dick has some idea, but he's not sure. there were some meanies there in Dorchester that were
Yeah.
cousins.
Yeah.
But I never knew what their background was or anything like that. And Dick has another name, O'Connor or something like that. Some guy who used to run something down at the end of the beach down there, belonged below the Columbia Yacht Club. Remember where Steve had that boat? It was an O'Connor or somebody ran a stand or something like that, and they were supposed to be relatives. But anyway,
Okay, we were talking about Stephen J., who was, I guess that would be your uncle, right?
only he'd be great uncle.
Your great uncle. That's right.
He would be a great uncle. Because he would be Steve's uncle.
Okay, so he would be your father's uncle.
Yeah, that's right.
And he was the.
He's the guy. He's the guy that presume of that class. You saw the booklet that Joe had of the 10 graduates, and on it said something like 6 of them out of the 10, 6 of them became priests or something. That's and 4 of them became doctors. And this fellow Stephen, he died. As I understood it, he was also going to be a priest, and he was headed for St. John's. I always thought he had died in the first year, but apparently he must have died that summer.
Do you know how he died? Or?
I don't know. I thought it was appendix, but then again, he had later on there was another Daniel, and he died suddenly too, and I guess that was appendix too. So maybe one of them was. I don't really understand that one. But anyway, he's the fellow that's buried over in the. That's how I got a hold of the. I found the deed, and I checking on this, that, and the other thing, and checked over in the Hollywood Cemetery, and that's where I found that lot. And the original Daniel was there, and Stephen J. and some, I don't know what they were, sisters, cousins, whatever.
Yeah, all named Hart.
Oh, well, no, there were other names. I think the only 2 Harts were Daniel and Stephen.
Okay.
And
Now you were telling me how the person on the stone, the name on the stone was not Hart.
yeah, and and just when I want to remember, Cockery.
Cockery, that's right. I would remember.
Cockery. And I told the fellow to save this. I told the fellow to save the stone.
Yeah.
At least the words of it.
Now,
And it mentioned the county that he was born.
now, when you say save the stone, in other words, this new stone that's going in
Would replace this little.
is going to replace it. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Because it would appear that this fellow Cockery, I mean, I'm just putting 4 and 4 together. It would appear that this fellow Cockery must have been a cousin. He was born around the same time, 1813 or 14. So they must have either come over together, or they must have lived together. They might have been cousins. They might have been friends. It could have been Daniel's wife's father. Could have been. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
But
Brother.
it seems a brother.
If they were born at the same time, right?
Yeah,
something
well,
like that, yeah. Some kind
well,
of
it couldn't have been his brother, because it would have to be the father, because they were born, Daniel and this guy Cockery were born at the same time, so they would have been the same age.
Right, right.
But I don't know what the only thing that's intriguing is why would Daniel buy a lot for a fellow by the name of Cockery?
Right.
But in those days they used to live together and take care of each other, and if you had a house or a room, why you'd bring in a cousin or a relative or a friend from a village or whatever. I guess I don't know that much about it,
Yeah.
but that would seem to be the case. And that would explain why he put up a stone. Why he bought a lot, put up a stone, and gave the whole history of the guy. He must have been close to him. So in the very next year, this Stephen dies, and so he's buried there, 1877. Cockery's 1876. The date on the deed is 76.
Now, when you mean Daniel died, right?
No. This guy Cockery.
Okay. Okay, his name was Stephen Concord?
No, no,
Go ahead.
I've forgotten his, Daniel, I think his, no, I don't know what his name was. I don't know what his name was
Okay,
off the top of my head.
The Hart who bought that was Daniel Hart.
The guy who bought it was Daniel, and he bought it to bury this fella Cockery.
Okay, and then he died about a year later.
Then his son Stephen died a
His
year
son
later.
Stephen, okay.
Now when Daniel himself died, I don't know, it's on the stone.
Okay,
Probably 1890, something like that.
right, okay.
And then his wife is in there and so forth and so on. So, and who all the others are that are in there, I don't know. They may be cousins or maybe daughters or married daughters. I just don't know.
Okay.
So, well, I don't know what else to say about that, except that I had the diploma of this fellow Stephen from the first graduating class, and I gave it to BC, and right now they can't seem to find it. And
Well, we'll locate that one way or another.
and also I gave them the program for the first graduating class. They have other programs, the guy told me, but I know I had given them that too. So now this Stephen's brother would have been Pat, who was the contractor, and he would have been Steve's father.
Right.
And he had a son by the name of he had a son by the name of Daniel. It must have been his first son, I would guess.
And who had the son by the name of
Patrick.
Patrick, okay.
Patrick.
Which now this son would have been your uncle.
He would have been my uncle. He would have been Steve's brother.
Right.
Which would explain a couple of things about Steve. But evidently this was, now if he went off to college, he went off to either St. Peter's or St. Joseph's. Now that's in writing someplace, whether it went, there's a notebook that this fellow Daniel, who was Steve's brother, there's a notebook with a whole lot of poetry in it. I don't know whether it's original or not. I don't think so. I think it's translations from the Latin or something like that. And I think I gave that to BC too, but I'm not sure. But he went to either St. Peter's or St. Joseph's, which would be New Jersey, Pennsylvania, somewhere in around there.
Mm-hmm.
But he had to come home around 1900 because of the fall of the family fortunes, which would prove a couple of points.
Yeah.
In other words, he's going to college and he's getting his tuition paid, etc., etc. And he evidently has to come home.
So this was 1 or 2 years into his
Probably.
education.
I would guess. And he died suddenly from whether appendicitis, and I don't really know. But the story went, and once again, I don't know where the source of it is. And why they'd be in Randolph, I don't know, except for this place up on High Street, because they're Dorchester people.
Right.
But he bought the lot. This would now be Patrick.
Yeah.
When this son dies, this Daniel, he buys the lot down in St. Mary's, which is the lot where Steve is now.
Yep.
And it's around 1900. And the next year, about 1901, Patrick died, which is interesting. And the house alongside of the cemetery, Joe can show it to you, it's the old McGuire house. As I understand it, once again, with no particular proof of the pudding, as I understand it, this fellow Daniel must have been the apple of Patrick's eye.
Right.
Because the story goes that when Patrick died, he was so broken-hearted that he bought the McGuire house, which is right alongside of the cemetery, and he lived in there just to be close to Daniel. If you're a little psychologist, you can
Right.
see these things.
Yeah.
And that he died the following year of a broken heart. I mean, where I got that, I just don't know. That just
Did he move the family out? Or
He moved the family from someplace to the McGuire, the old McGuire house, so-called McGuire house.
No, someplace in Dorchester.
From Dorchester, and or out here in High Street. I don't, get all this stuff, because Steve, as I say, never told you stuff like that. but yeah, it's trying to put things together.
Right.
And Steve's two sisters came out here, and they lived in a house on the corner of they lived in the corner of School Street and Carter Street for a number of years. When I was a kid, I can remember them living there, opposite the Forest House.
Yeah.
Now, why they came out here, I don't know.
Now, when you say, in other words, Patrick's daughters you're talking about now,
Yeah, Steve's sisters.
they didn't come out with Patrick too when he came out to the old McGuire house, or?
Oh, I don't know that.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
How old would Steve have been in 1900, roughly?
How old would your grandfather be?
Right.
I think they were all born in the 1800s. 17s, 1800. They'd have been 25, 30, something like that. I would guess.
Okay, so they're 25, 30, so.
I would guess.
That's what I'm wondering, why.
Well, see, if you figure that, well, he probably would have been a little bit less, but if you figure that Daniel died in around 1900 and he's in his second or third year of college, he's 20 years old.
He's the oldest.
And he must have been the oldest, because it would explain something about Steve.
Okay.
Because Steve left high school. And and Steve was an awful smart guy.
Yeah.
he never told you that, but he really was smart.
What high school was that?
Dorchester High.
Yeah.
And then he got into sailing or something like that. But I was always intrigued by how such a smart guy could quit school and become, quote unquote, a sailor.
Yeah.
But
And this would have been right around that time? Right around 1900 or early, a little bit earlier maybe? Or could it have been?
Well, once again, I'd be playing psychological games, and I'd be saying to myself, well, if I am the second son,
yeah,
and my older brother is going to college, and he's very, very bright,
yeah,
and my father adores him,
yeah,
and he's heartbroken over what happens, I would guess the second son feels rejected.
right.
I would guess he would say, to heck with this, and
maybe quit high
and
school.
take off.
Right.
In other words, don't be telling, it's the old story, don't be telling how smart the first one is,
Mm-hmm.
because that sort of thing. I mean, that's psychology. Which to me, it took me years to figure that one out, and I'm not sure it's true, but it would have a degree of if you're in the school business, it would be very, very reasonable.
Right.
And also why Steve apparently had no great love for his father. I suppose this shouldn't be on tape, but makes no great difference, I guess. So where do we go? So where do we
so
go?
now
Now one problem that maybe you could handle, I've been trying to do something about it for years and years and years, is this fellow Daniel, for whom they bought the stone, who's the first one buried in that lot. Now John Hurley and I agreed on this before John died, and I asked John to find out why isn't Daniel's name on there. They never were able, John never was able to find the records down at St. Mary's of Daniel's being buried down there. No one's ever been able to find out where he was born and when he died or why or whatever.
Right.
And yet he is. And I called up Mission Hill, St. Peter's. And St. Peter's said, well, those old records, before St. Peter's was built, they had St. Gregory's. He says prior to a certain date, all the records for all those people who lived in the Mission Hill, St. Peter's Church area, and Freeport Street and all that sort of stuff, would be down at St. Gregory's. Well, I never pursued that.
St. Gregory's in Dorchester.
Yeah, St. Gregory's in Dorchester. In other words, you could find out when Daniel was born, and he would have been born in Boston, and he probably died in Boston. Probably, I don't know, because there's no town records, according to John Early.
In Randolph.
In Randolph.
Yeah.
And the old cemetery records don't show that. Well, the cemetery records around that time got all fouled up.
Right.
Ralph Cartwright had them for a while, and
This is for St. Mary's you're talking
for
about?
St. Mary's,
Yeah.
yeah. So they kind of got all messed up.
But we could theoretically
You
find something
you
at
could
St.
find, you
Gregory's.
certainly could, and also you could also find the thing that you know is the missing link is where all these people came from. If you can find, and there's no reason why you can't if you do a little research. I mean, you can hire people to do it, but with a little legwork, you can do it yourself. You go to the city of Boston, and you can find out when Daniel came here. You can find out when this James Hurley came here.
Daniel, the original Daniel?
The original Daniel.
Yeah.
You'd be able to find that out.
Yeah.
Because he would have been married here.
Right,
There would be a record of who he married, and it would also show where he was born.
right,
Right?
right.
And the same way with the original Hurley. It would be the same story. You could go through that process and find that out. Of course, you can get more sophisticated. You get ship's logs and all that sort of stuff. But well, anyway, that's basically the story of the original Daniel, his sons Stephen and
Daniel,
and Patrick,
that's right.
and then Patrick, who would have been Steve's father,
Right.
who would have been Joe's father, who would have been your father,
Right.
and so forth and so on.
Now, how did when Patrick moved out here to the old McGuire house, okay, that's when, I guess, Steve, at that point, had Steve met Fanny, or,
Oh gosh, I don't know about that. I don't remember when they were married. I'd have to think about that a couple of seconds. They must have been married around they must have been married about 1910 or 11 or 12.
so this was
Because I
after
was born
Steve's
in
travels?
What?
This was after Steve's travels?
Yeah, yeah.
Obviously, yeah.
This is when he had settled down. I don't know what he did when he first came to Randolph. I don't know whether he went like all out of them into the shoe factory or not. I don't know. I think maybe to some extent. I think his brother Peter was in the shoe factory. I do remember him telling me. That when they laid the original water mains in Randolph, that he helped to dig them.
Yeah.
Which is understandable.
Now, before we get into that, you said Stephen's brother Peter. How many sisters and brothers did Steve have, and who were they?
Yeah, well, they were in that book there. There was Peter,
Younger?
younger.
Third son, or?
No, there was just Steve and Peter.
Well, I mean, Daniel being the first, then Steve.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Right.
okay, yeah. So Peter would have been the younger, that's right. And then there were two girls, Mary and Catherine. So there would have been 5.
Right.
Patrick would have had 5 kids.
Right.
Now, they're all buried down here,
St. Mary's, yeah.
except Daniel's name is not on there.
Right. But we know he's
Which
in
is intriguing. I wished I'd done something about it, and I wish I still would, but I don't.
You mean as far as putting it on, or?
Yeah, putting it on
okay.
there, and recording it, and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Personally, I think that's kind of thing is kind of important.
Right.
But
Now, what do you know about Peter? Your uncle?
well, Peter, I think he worked in a. I think he originally came out here and worked in a factory. I'm not sure, and I don't remember what the heck he did later on. He left Randolph. When his oldest daughter Margaret was in the 6th grade, because we were close friends, and they went to Arlington, and he started a restaurant business. And I think that's what he was in for the rest of his days. He died quite a long time ago. And
Do you know the name of the restaurant, or?
no, I don't. No, it was something local in Arlington. I don't ever recall either being there. And he married a girl by the name of Klein. And all of the Harts in Arlington, there was a Margaret and a Catherine. Oh, I don't know. There were 6 of them, and one of them. They were all very right. They went to Lowell State and different places. And Margaret, who was my age, she married a Grannon. That's a Grannon funeral home in Arlington.
Grannon?
The Grannon, G-R-A-N. The only trouble with Bob Grannon was he was a Holy Cross man. And his son is now, I think, a selectman and a lawyer, very bright.
Yeah.
I think he's a selectman in Arlington. Other things I don't know what he does, but they've all done very, very well.
Do you ever see
I
them,
used
or-
to see Margaret all the time, and then I used to write, but the last couple of years we haven't done too well.
So she'd be a cousin, right?
She's a first cousin, and plus some, and then of course they'd be your cousins too, one way or another.
Yeah.
Well, I think there were 3 girls, and I think there was a boy. Might have been 4 girls. Anyway.
And these are all Peter's.
Oh, these are all Peter's offspring. Yeah,
Right.
these are all Peter's.
Now-
They used to live down here where the bank is. There used to be a whole mess of houses from the square on down. And the 3rd house down, I think, was the Hurley house, and the next house was the Hart house, and the next house was the Kane house. And the Kanes also were related, but I don't know how. John Hurley used to know all that stuff, but I don't remember.
So that was Peter Hart, your uncle. Now, tell me about your aunts.
One of them worked for McKesson Robbins, and the other one worked for White's.
White's.
The White department store on Tremont Street, which you wouldn't remember, I don't think.
No. That was all.
They just went out of business. They worked there, to the best of my knowledge, and that's for as long as I can. And they lived on Dick Street in Dorchester. They never married.
These are your aunts.
These are my aunts.
So they moved out to Randolph for a short time and then moved back.
And then moved back into the city.
Yeah.
I hardly remember them living on Carter Street. I hardly remember that.
Did they were together all that time, or?
They always lived together.
Yeah.
And as I say, they never married.
Now, these weren't the ones with the place down at the Cape, were they, or were those early aunts?
No, they had nothing to do with that.
Oh, okay.
No.
And do you know when they died, or?
I don't know. That's on the stone down there.
Okay. Did they come out much, or?
Yeah, they used to come out and visit quite a bit, and we used to go in and see them quite a bit.
Yeah.
And they used to sit me down. I can remember going down to Dick Street. I used to work for my aunt, who was a Hurley, who was a superior of a convent in Dorchester, and it was right near on Train Street, and Dick Street was right nearby. So I used to go down there every once in a while, and then they had fantastic memories, and they would tell me all about this, where they came from and who was related to whom and what village they came from or whatever in Ireland. And it went one in one ear and out the other, like it does with kids. They don't care about it.
Yeah.
You're not interested in your relatives until you get to be 90. So I probably, if you had something like this, and you could tape them, you'd have gotten you've gotten it all from the horse's mouth,
Right.
And all of this thing you wouldn't have to be just puzzled about. So, but I don't remember a thing they told me. I haven't the faintest idea where they came from or anything.
Yeah. Well, we could, like you said, if we wanted to, we could find out about
If you
Daniel.
wanted to, yes.
One way or
I
another.
think it would be relatively easy compared to finding out about other things.
Right.
Because I think with all the marriages and all the births, they just have to be recorded.
Right.
And you always have to tell where you were born.
Mm-hmm.
Because-
So, your 2 aunts, for the most part, I mean, they lived and died in Boston or
Yeah.
in Dorchester.
Yeah, I would say, yeah.
All right. So now I want you to, I don't know how well you can do it, but can you fill in the time from the time Stephen left school to the time he got married in 1910 roughly, or
You know,
no? You just know he went to, he said he was a sailor, or?
yeah. There's a 2 or 3 pictures. Dick has, I think, well, I may have a couple. And what sailor means, I don't really know.
Yeah.
It seemed to be more coastwise, small type things.
But in fact, he worked on a boat.
But
one way or
in
another.
fact, he did work on a boat, and he always hung around boats. And when he got older and lived here and worked here, he always hung around boats, and he used to. There was an old lawyer in Boston by the name of Dillaway, and this fellow Dillaway bought a 35-foot boat